Luke, how's it going?
Hey everyone, how's it going?
It is going great. So, I know I love to share the weather of Canada. And let me just tell you, we've had some beautiful weather. We've had plus 18, all our snow. And then today, like I look outside and it's just like the wind is whipping the hail around. And I'm like, I just don't know. I just don't know these days anymore. It's the change of season that we go through in life with the weather, just like life brings changes of seasons to
Look,
us.
you already dropping words already. Look at that.
Look at that. So, our podcast on the road to Damascus, we are doing some really cool things. We have been bringing guests on to share their stories, to share the things that they feel is a message on their heart to share. And we have a special guest today. We have our friend Jake Doberenz here, and he loves to work with young adults. And Jake, as a mom of a young adult, wow, that's all I have to say. Period. That could be the end of the podcast. You do some work with young adults. That's, I think, for me, that's one of the hardest fields to work in. I love working with teenager. Luke works. You work with young kids.
Yeah.
You work with teenagers, but young adults. What is that like, Jake? Working with young adults?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't get as many chances now, thanks to a global pandemic you might have heard about. But yeah, it's fun. I like that age group because there's kind of an optimism of starting out. The world can be anything, um, and sometimes that's kind of a naive optimism, of course. But it's a fun group. They're intelligent. Um, well, they think they're intelligent, and there is some wisdom there, um, that I think we have to recognize, compared to some other groups. Because right now I teach a middle school debate class, so literally I am familiar with middle schoolers screaming at each other. I've done the youth ministry route, and so college kids seem to be, and young adults in general seem to be this really good age where they're much more mature, but I don't know. There's something exciting on the horizon. They they are able to be molded and shaped. They're
Mm.
not quite set in their ways, and they're willing to experiment and engage with new ideas and give the benefit of the doubt to something they maybe haven't heard before. So it's a really exciting group to work with. And when I teach Bible class to them, and I just let them go, what do you think about this? And I hear some awesome answers. And these are people that are really, um, interested in kind of exploring some of these deep topics, like, spirituality. And so it becomes pretty fun to interact with them.
For sure.
But
Did you always feel like you were called to kind of work to administer to young people? And where did that start? When did you realize that that's where you were going to spend most of your time? Definitely in this season.
yeah, I've fallen into most of the ministry that I've seen that have happened in my life. And in this case, it was kind of by accident. What happened was I was in the college ministry at my church, and the college minister that we had quit suddenly, like 2 weeks notice. He's gone, and there's no replacement, no nothing. So I'm one of those people that just kind of naturally takes over. So I just kind of naturally took over, did that volunteer for like a year and a half. And then the church said, "Hey, do you want to like be paid for this?" And I said, "Sure." So right after I graduated college, I just kind of found myself in that role. Um, but I've always been passionate about that. Even before I was a young adult, I kind of had this idea that I was going to be teaching college. I wanted to be a Bible professor for a very long time. Not a dream I share anymore, but I love that age group. Like I said earlier, there's just something about it where these are people that are just intelligent enough, and they're on the precipice of something, and so it's a fun group to work with. I am one of them. I am. Uh, almost 24 years old. Depends on when this comes out. My birthday is in mid-May. So when I'm in mid-May, I'll be 24. So I myself am one of these people that I'm ministering to, which, have pros and cons, of course. Most of the people I work with, the college students, are younger than me. College age usually ends about 22. So I'm just a little bit older than them. But I think that gives me some advantages, although plenty of disadvantages. But this is an age group that definitely respects somebody who is a peer, generally.
Interesting. So because your age, and I find it really interesting with your age being 24 and working with young adults between 18 and 22, do you find a lot of mirroring of your identity and their identity together? Because that's one of the biggest topics. You have a book that is coming out on April 13th called How We Are or Who We Are.
Who We Are. Yeah.
Who We Are. And it's the 7 identities to shape your life. So you're very passionate about identity. And as you said, you have these young adults, you're molding them for future generations. That started somewhere for you, that journey of identity. Can you tell me where that identity journey started for you, and then how you can help shape the young adults going into the future?
Yeah. Well, so where to start with that? Well, yeah. So for me, my identity journey is, one like everybody's identity journey. It evolves over time and takes on new meanings. But by the time I became a college student and I'm, out of my house, something that I had wanted to get out for a while, and now I get to explore, and now I get to be my own person and trying to figure out, okay, who am I going to be? And so that's kind of where that journey started. My personality is one where I'm more prone to be identified, put in as a part of my identity, success and intelligence and things like that. And that was a part of my identity for a long time. Um, Even when the Christian label was attached to that. So I went to public school and I was the really passionate preacher guy who was trying to evangelize to everybody and convince them of the errors of their way. And so that was a part of my identity, being a Christian, and I was known for that.
Yeah.
But these other things got stacked on about, this intelligence that I wanted to be perceived as. And later, especially in college, as I kind of discovered in entrepreneurship and things like that, wanting to build this big business and write all these books and all that kind of crazy stuff. And I did manage to write a book. That this is the book. So I did manage to secure some of that, but I've had to shift right from something that's not actually bad, and that's one of the things I talk about a lot in the book.
Yeah.
It's not bad to want to be to appear as a certain way or to have success, not bad to be happy, but the issue is when that becomes too much of a part of your identity. Particularly in school, I was known a lot for what I was against. And I remember one time in middle school, somebody saying like, particularly, and I won't go into this because it's kind of controversial, but I talked a lot about creation, evolution, apologetics. Those were my big passions. So people would start knowing me as like the evolution guy. And that wasn't the identity that I wanted. I wanted to be the Christian guy. I wanted to be known for what I stood for, but I was known for what I was against. So sometimes these good intentions become too big of part of our identities, and there needs to be a reckoning. So that's kind of why I wrote the book, to showcase these identities that we should kind of take on, and also recognize and be aware of these identities that kind of creep up and become priorities when they really shouldn't be. So the book started as a college class, and I had read a book on college ministry, and it talked about, here are the 5 meta issues that all young adults are facing, and one of them was identity. And I decided that was kind of the foundational one, because some of the other stuff about intimacy and truth, those are some some big kind of issues that young adults face. But I wanted to start with identity, because if we get our identity in Christ right, then we can talk about what does it mean to relate to other people as a Christian? What does it mean to seek truth as a Christian, etc.? So if we can kind of get our identity right, kind of figure out who we are, then we can go forward.
I love
Yeah.
that. You said so many powerful things there. It could I was like, write that down. You know, being being noticed more for what you were against than what you were for. I think
Yeah.
that's a powerful word for even the state that the world is in right now. The way that we label each other, identify people isn't what we stand for, it's what we're against. And that's normally the negative side of, and that's what
Right.
divides us in one sense
Yeah.
rather than brings us together. Because I think ultimately the world is actually gunning for the same thing. We all want the same thing. We all just think of different ways to get in there. But when we start identifying with what we're against in terms of the ways, and we're not talking about what we're for, it gets
Yeah.
messy. But my question, Jake, is that you just mentioned at the end there about when somebody gets their identity right in Christ. Like, for a listener who, may be a Christian, may not be a Christian, and obviously they follow our podcast, they've heard about this. What is an identity based in the world, and what is an identity rooted in Christ in your own experience? And have you had that tug of war being a young man yourself?
Yeah, like I mentioned, success was one of those for me. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, I kind of
Yeah.
fall in the Enneagram 3 kind of category, and achievements and things like that are a big part of what I want to do. And right now, in addition to writing books like this, I run a business called Theophany Media that creates podcasts and publishes things and does that, kind of the intersection between creativity and faith. And that's something I poured my heart and soul into. And it's tough when I post that post on social media and it gets 3 likes, and I don't know, it hurts me, right? I feel bad that it's not making the impact. And I tell myself these stories of, well, I'm trying to, make Jesus famous. I'm trying to do this ministry. But at the end of the day, it's a challenge for me. I have this idol of success. So that's the focus of the second chapter of my book. Of success is sort of this false identity, and I replace that with a heart for God. It's not about the treasures we store up on earth; it's the treasures we store up in heaven. And as you read the Gospels, what Jesus is talking about, it's so much about what is your heart, what is your longing for, kind of deep inside. So I want to reposition myself, just like I want to do the readers and anybody else I'm mentoring on this, to get that desire right. It needs to be directed towards God and not directed into yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's anybody who's like, if they drop in and listen to this, can so identify with that, because we often, if we don't have our identity in Christ, we have our identity in somewhere. And if it's not success, it's something else. And Luke, we've talked about that, hey, where I've had my identity wrapped up in my family, where I've had my identity wrapped up in my worth. And so to hear a different perspective of it being wrapped up in success, even though it doesn't look bad, right? It doesn't look bad. That's the thing. As Christians, we could easily say, Jake, no, success is a good thing. It's good. You're doing amazing things, right? But at the end of the day, what are we doing it for? What are we doing it for? And so tell me, you were telling me that you had this mindset of success and you changed your mindset to Christ. What was that struggle like for you when you had to lay down success? You picked up Christ. Did that change your identity? Of course, it probably changed your identity, but did it change around you? Did it change how you ran your business? Did it change how you were, how you affected people around you? What did it look like?
So I guess I should mention first that it's not just like, one day I wake up and, hey, success is no longer idle for me. Yay. So I mentioned that with the like social media likes, it's no longer about, how many. Um, there might be different measurements like, well, did I make a difference in one person's life?
Yeah.
There's also a focus on sort of a long-term result. One of my struggles is efficiency. I want to take the shortcut to the thing. I don't want to do the long route. But having a heart for God is kind of playing the long game,
Right.
because true love towards people often takes a long time. There's not shortcuts to it. So as I go through my life and do my business, I'm going to bring value to people without expecting anything in return, and just keep doing that. And perhaps down the line, I'll be able to see some success here and there, but my focus is not on the success, it's on the providing value, showing love and kindness, and well, pretty much all the fruits of the spirit you can just throw in there. And that's the focus now. So it's kind of a mindset shift, but it's supposed to be a whole lifestyle shift, though that's difficult to just flip a switch on. As I mentioned, it takes a lot for Christ to just sort of fully transform you, and and I would argue it's a something that happens throughout our entire life. However, one of the reasons that I called the book Who We Are instead of Who I Am, which was the original title, is because I wanted to remind people that we do this in community, in our local churches, in the believers that we connect with through online or through whatever. We do this in community. Something that I have found is being able to confess these sins and these idols and false identities to people in my life, whether that's the minister at my church or my wife or these online communities I'm a part of. And when I have a team of people saying, we're going to help you out, we are going to have your back here and remind you that you should be focused on God and not on success or whatever false identity, it just makes a world of difference.
Mm.
Yeah.
People really help with that change. And that's kind of why the church exists. And God never meant us to go at this alone. Just wasn't, isn't what we're supposed to, how we're supposed to live.
Well, yeah. I think you've just mentioned that great point about like that community and the aspects of where it's the church community, the believing community, and we like looking into the next generation now, or these young adults who are obviously struggling with this sense of identity, this sense of value, and all these idols that they're creating. Um, what are you seeing within young people right now in terms of these idols that are coming up? What are the things that they're placing their identity in? And how have you seen that present itself in one sense in the conversations that you've been having?
Yeah. One that sticks out is kind of this idea of happiness. But I think a lot of young people wouldn't say, you know, I just want to be happy. We kind of hide that true meaning by using other terms like self-fulfillment or something like that, and or meaning or purpose, which it's a delicate balancing act, because it's okay to be happy, and I think there's an extent of which we should be filled, and all those things. We should have a purpose, and we should have lives of meaning. But oftentimes that's just fancy way to talk about, I just want something for myself. It's selfishness at the end of the day, and that ends up often excluding other people. So that's one again I want to reframe to say, okay, so let's stop focusing on yourself. Let's focus on other people, and let's kind of switch that. So that's one I would see with a lot of young people, and it's a really challenging one, because there are some teachers that would say, like, hey, you shouldn't be happy. Stop that. It's not about you at all. God doesn't care about you as a person, just what you do or something like that. And that's totally wrong. So I don't want to say that, but I do want to kind of balance it and say, okay, yeah, you're important. And I think there's a sense in which we have to do something that kind of fulfills us. Um, I'm working with a lot of people who are not really sure of like a career path kind of thing. And I'm not really sure about a career path too. So I'm right along with them. And that's tough though, because there comes to a point where you can't necessarily just get into your dream job, especially if your dream job is I want to lounge on the beach every day. Well, okay, maybe we can build a life for you where you can sometimes lounge on the beach, but probably not gonna, pay the bills and support your ministry, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to kind of balance that, and that was a big struggle in creating this book. And anytime I teach or minister to young adults, especially because I don't want to do the extremes. The world at large is really good at the extremes, and I don't want to go there because they're both destructive.
Wow, and you know what? That's so powerful, Jake, because and Luke and I have talked about this. We've shared this previously in our podcast, but even just one on one in our conversations, we talk about, and I talk about what I call the pendulum swing. We have the extreme one way and the extreme the other way. And then we have the middle. And the middle, as you said, and you said it perfectly, it's the balancing act of being right smack in the middle. It's the tightrope walk and never falling onto either side. And that middle is the truth, right?
Mhm.
Which is it's God. It's that middle of there, because God does want to have the desires of your heart, but he also wants the desires of the world, which you're part of to help bring. And so yeah, it definitely, and teaching young adults coming up, because as I said, I have my own who's 19, who thinks that he's way smarter than me. I call him an adult with training wheels, because I
I
can make
like
fun
it.
of him a little bit. um, but one of the one things I love watching is I love watching the struggle of him finding and battling out his faith with God, because I know the promise is to never leave or forsake you. And so watching him battle it out with God to find the truth of who he is has been so honoring to be part of. And so I can't believe that you get to watch this in so many young adults' lives and watch how God is forming them to go out into the world. It's beautiful. I love all of that. So as we keep moving forward, because I want to know more. I want to know a bit more. What I'd like to know is that your struggle, when you went into identity and success, and the struggle that we're finding our young adults are having with happiness. Success can lay down. How do you tell them to lay down the happiness and pick up Christ? How do you deliver that balance? Because when somebody says don't be happy, then that means I got to be sad, right? And so it's right. My kids, when I say you can't do this, I'm not telling them you get to do these other amazing things. What they hear is you don't get to. How do you teach that? How do you format that to them so that it's landing?
Yeah, that's a challenge. And like I mentioned earlier, it's still something that I struggle with. Um, but I guess the best solution that I can come up with is to show, not tell in this case. So what that means in a college class, which we haven't been able to meet in person for a long while, but um, I did a whole class on Christ calling in my career, which was just directly about like how do you like plan out your life and find meaning in career, all this kind of stuff. And I intentionally incorporated older adult men and women in our congregation to come in and talk about their own career journey and their faith journey so that I could show them here are some people way further down who have had that wrestling match between the extremes, between the yes and the no, and have kind of come out of it's somewhere in the middle. So I think it's always good to demonstrate that. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So I want to seek people who are doing a really good job at imitating Christ and kind of living lives where they're joyful, but they're also obedient. And they have some measure of success, but their focus is on God and not on bringing home the dollar bills, um, or the pound sterling or whatever. I don't for our international yeah. So I think that's just one of the best things I can do, because you can't really just, it's hard to just tell. Sometimes you got to show it. Um, and I'm a creator and artist, story writer. So I also think storytelling is a really good way to do that. If I can't point to a physical person or drag them into the room, I can also use stories or videos to kind of communicate some of this complexity, because these really complex issues, it's just challenging to just lecture them into finding the balance and changing their identity. There's so much more. And I also, on top of that, I encourage people to always be in mentorship relationships. I think every Christian should have a mentor above them, and then somebody they're mentoring, and then they're the mentoree. And unless you're like 99 years old in the church and you've been loving Jesus for that long, maybe you don't need a mentor. But pretty much everybody else should have somebody further along the journey they can go to, somebody below them, and also people on the same path as them, also to connect with, right at the same level. So there's different levels. That's ultimately how we change identity, which ironically is not something my book can actually do. It's not a real person that's living and speaking into your life. So so this is a starting point, but the end of it is to say, okay, now go find somebody, discuss this with, live this out, talk about it, etc. That would really be my hope, because like I said, I'm just some 24-year-old guy. What do I know? Um, I feel like I know a couple things. I have a master's degree in theological studies, and I've worked with people on this, and I've struggled in my own life. So I feel like I have a couple things to say, but ultimately, go find wise people. I'd rather you have a mentor than, buy 7 copies of my book, kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. You're a man of wisdom, Jake. You're a young man that carries a lot of wisdom. If there was, I think you probably just answered the question that I was gonna ask you, if I'm honest. Um, if there was that one person that kind of was in front of you and said, I'm wrestling. I don't know who I am. I don't know what my purpose is. All of these kind of questions, which for like what Yvonne said, right? My little lad's only like 2, right? So I don't need to worry about this for a while, right? But Yvonne, your children are at that prime age of asking them questions.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, because there's a lot of listeners that are probably parents actually of teenagers. How would you address it as a parent? How do you think parents, the older generation, can speak to this younger, Generation Z? Are they Z now? I'm a millennial, so like Generation Z. How does the older generation get through to these children, young people, and how do we guide them in a way that past generations have said, oh, we're just going to do it our way, which obviously hasn't worked and it's not connecting, and it needs people like you who are maybe at a mutual age. What does an older generation do to connect to this generation coming up?
Yeah, I always encourage listening on both ends, young people and quote unquote old people. Um, Wherever you want to draw the lines there, I'll let you decide. And I always encourage listening, because there isn't a lot of that. There's a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. Sometimes Well, I'll tell you how I taught a class in my church, and I explained that too often we want to be um, mouths, but we should start by being shoulders, and then we move into ears, and then we can be a mouth. And that's just kind of an analogy to describe, like, first we're just there to the older generation should just care. Just, man, that's terrible. I feel for you. They should just care. And
Yeah.
then that person will open up to them, be that ear. And then finally, when that relationship develops, they can speak truth into their life. So that's kind of the journey there. That's not easy to do. And sometimes the hardest part is just to start. How do you be that shoulder? Um, because young people are kind of scared of old people are kind of scared of young people. At least is my observation. And it's tough. But one of the things I do at my church also in just doing college ministry, I try to focus on intergenerational kind of things. There's a lot of different ways to facilitate that. And sometimes you kind of have to be a little artificial and force people into a group. We have a small group model that I'm actually really excited about. I'm kind of reinventing it now because everybody's have their comfortable small groups. So I'm going to chop them up and throw people different ways and force them to get uncomfortable and to engage with new people and be more intergenerational, because a lot of those groups end up being, you have the old people's group and the young people's group, and so kind of doing some of that mixing hopefully will kind of help that. That's my hope in the future. But again, for advice, I think the older generation needs to go where the young people are and be that shoulder. That doesn't necessarily mean you all need to get TikToks or something like that, but it might. Just kind of depending.
Wow, that what, that's really good. I know, because as a mom, I'm not old. Okay, I just want to point that out first. I'm not old, but
Yes, agreed.
I do
Completely.
have a 19-year-old, and then I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and for them, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I really started learning the value of caring about what they cared about and listening to what they are telling me, and not just surface listening, like actually listening. Because some of the things I tell you that I've had to sit through listening, I can tell you about all the different animes that are out there. I can tell you about cosplaying. I can tell you all about Marvel and Star Wars and Lego and the video games and TikTok and those things. And not because I do any of that. Well, except for Marvel, I love superheroes, but
Amen.
because my kids love them. And so I learned how to listen to the superficial, and then it was like they understood on some level that if I listen to that, they can bring the hard issues to me. And that was a big opportunity when when my oldest is 17 and he's sitting on the couch telling me the hard things that are happening in life right now. It's because I spent 13, 14, 15, 16 listening to the boy things. And that has opened doors. So yeah, you're right. That's a huge one. And I think that as a generation, being a millennial, like talking to the younger generation, I love the analogy, the shoulders, the ear, and then the mouth. That is so good. Is that in your book?
No, that's not in my book.
Okay. Maybe you
That's just a
need
freebie for you.
maybe
But
you need to maybe you need to do like a mentorship kind of book or something like that.
Yeah.
You got to coin that phrase because that's really good.
Yeah.
I've definitely thought about writing, like, a book, Dear Old People or something. Although I wouldn't call it that. That'd be too offensive. But something along that line would be a really interesting book. Kind of what young people want you to know. We'll see.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, you said it here first, Jake, for sure. Now I know that you wanted to give our listeners an opportunity to have an experience of your book. How can our listeners do that?
Yeah, so I created a special link just for listeners of this podcast to get the introduction and the first chapter of the book completely free. Just sent them a PDF copy. And you can go to jakedoberenz.com/Damascus. So Doberenz is a weird one, Doberenz. So jakedoberenz.com/Damascus will take you right there, and you can check it out.
That's
Amazing. Thank you so
awesome.
much. And we'll make sure to drop that link in all our notes as well so people can go straight over and grab a copy. I'm going to go and grab a copy for myself. I'm excited after listening to you speak about the topic.
Yeah, it's been great. We love having you on, Jake. Thanks for dropping those gems. They've been fantastic. If anybody, do you have a social media or Instagram that they can connect with you on?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter at Jake Doberenz, but I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. Everything's just at Jake Doberenz.
Awesome.
So if you can learn how to spell the last name, you can find me.
So I'm going to spell it again, Doberenz.
There we
So
go.
for anybody who's listening, Jake Doberenz, if you guys have loved the nuggets that he has dropped, go follow him on Facebook or Instagram. Go grab a copy of the introduction and the first chapter, because if you want to know who we are, you want to listen to those 7 identities, you want to get a taste for it, you want to go read a little bit of a snapshot of that. So thank you, Jake, for coming on the road to Damascus. Thank you for sharing your story and your journey through identity.
Yeah, this was great. I loved being on here. Thank you so much.
No, you're more than welcome. And everyone who's listening, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure that you give it a like, a comment, share it with your friends, your family, share it with your church, your community, so everyone can hear about Jake's amazing story. And like Yvonne said, the amazing nuggets that he's given us over this podcast. Hope everyone has the most amazing week, and we will see you again next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.